All right, last section of chapter 8, we are talking about the quadratic formula. So this one is kind of procedural in that we're just going to use a formula to get some answers. But we're going to get it from our original equation that we've been talking about, our standard form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So for these equations, we know we have values for a, b, and c. We've talked about in previous sections that there are some equations, some quadratic equations that we are not able to factor just with the way the numbers are. This is the section where we're going to talk about what to do with those. So the quadratic formula allows us to solve certain equations that are not factorable. The way we get the quadratic formula, there's basically a long process. Well, it's not super long. We manipulate this equation with the a and b values until we solve for the x variable. So it's a lot of algebra, but after enough steps, we arrive at this equation, or this formula, I should say. So once you solve it for x, it looks something like this. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. So I know this looks super weird and kind of scary, but, and I use lowercase letters, I guess, when we used uppercase letters here. But what this means is, when we're given a quadratic equation, we can substitute our a, b, and c values in to their proper locations in this formula, and then simplify it to get our answer for x. So the way we're going to solve these problems, we're going to set one side equal to 0. Some of them already are. We're going to identify the a, b, and c values, so our a, b, and c values, plug them into the quadratic formula, and solve for both answers. So we're actually going to get 2 answers, and that's because of this plus and minus symbol. I'll explain that once we get through our first example. So let's go ahead and just try this out in example A. So I'm going to leave the quadratic formula in green visible up there so you can see it. So first we need our a, b, and c values. So for problem A, our a value is 4, our b value is 12, and our c value is negative 72. Now, we are just going to plug these into the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b would be negative 12 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So that would be 12 squared minus 4 times a times c. So 4 times a, so a is also 4, and then c is negative 72, all divided by 2 times our a value of 4. So I'm going to use red for a, green for b, and yellow for c. So my a values, where did my a values go? Well, I had one of them here and I have one of them here. B values, where was that? Well, I have one of them here and one of them here. And then C value is right there. So that's just some quick color coding where I got my values. I forgot to put parenthesis around this. So that's how we use the quadratic formula. We plug in our A, B, and C values, and then to figure out what x equals, we just need to simplify. So, I'm going to zoom in. If we start simplifying, I will have negative 12 plus or minus the square root. And now, what is 12 squared? You can use your calculator, but that should equal 144. Then we have minus, and then this whole product. So minus, and then you can plug all three of these into your calculator. 4 times 4 times negative 72. And we should get 1,152, but it was negative. So the subtraction sign in our original formula is here, but then because this 72 was negative when I multiplied these, that's another negative sign I have to keep track of. So I'll end up subtracting a negative, which is the same thing as adding a positive, but we simplified all of that. And then in the denominator, we had 2 times 4, which is 8. Okay, so I want to simplify that square root a little more. So we have negative 12 plus or minus the square root. So this would turn into a plus positive 1,152. So you can use your calculator and plug in 144 plus 1,152, and you should get 1,296. And this is still divided by 8. Now I know these numbers don't look nice, but if you go ahead and plug in the square root of 1296 into your calculator, you should actually get a pretty nice answer. So we end up getting negative 12 plus or minus 36 divided by 8. So when you plug in the square root of 1296 into your calculator, you should get 36. If you ever get a decimal at that point, there's a very good chance that you accidentally made a mistake up here. So when you take the square root, you should get a nice integer number. Now, really quickly, this plus or minus, the reason we use this is because this number is technically positive and negative. Because if I take positive 36 times positive 36, I get 1296. But if I take negative 36 times negative 36, I also get 1296. So that's the reason that we have this plus or minus sign, is because both numbers, positive and negative 36, work for this problem. So this is where we actually need to split into 2 answers. So from here, I'm going to do this. So for my answers, I will have negative 12 plus 36 divided by 8. And then I'll also have negative 12 minus 36 divided by 8. So this plus or minus indicates that we get 2 different answers. One of them when we add 36, and one of them where we subtract 36. So to finish solving, we just need to simplify these individual fractions, and then we will have 2 answers. So doing that, I simplify my numerator up here. Negative 12 plus 36 is 24, and 24 divided by 8 is 3. So that's my first answer, 3. And then down here, negative 12 minus 36, that gets me negative 48, and negative 48 divided by 8 is negative 6. So my 2 answers are 3 and negative 6. So x equals 3, x equals negative 6. So that is how we use the quadratic formula. That one had big numbers, so not all your problems are going to have numbers as big as that, so they won't be quite as complicated, but this is the general procedure that we're going to follow. So now let's take a look at B. Once again, we want to start by labeling our A, B, and C values. So A, in this case, is 1. B, we don't actually have a B value, because if we look, I have m squared, but then there's no m term. So in other words, B would just be 0, and then my C value is negative 9. So I think this will make it a little easier than the last problem. So let's use the quadratic formula. So x equals, and then remember I have it up here in green. So negative b, well that's negative 0, so that'll be easy to simplify. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, well that's 0 squared, so that'll also be easy. Minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. All right, I think this one's going to be a little easier. So simplifying, negative 0 is just 0, plus or minus the square root of 0 squared is just 0, and then I'll have minus, and then 4 times 1 times negative 9. If you use your calculator, 4 times 1 times negative 9 should get negative 36 divided by 2 times 1, which is just 2. All right, so this will equal, we have 0 plus or minus a negative, or here we are subtracting a negative, so this will actually become the square root of positive 36 divided by 2. The square root of 36 is 6, so we have 0 plus or minus 6 over 2. So at this point, we can split into two equations. So I have 0 plus or, I guess I can drop the 0 at this point. So in this case, it would be positive 6 over 2 and negative 6 over 2 are my two different solutions. So for this one, our answer would be 3. For this one, our answer would be negative 3. So what I want you to do now is take a look at problems C and D. I want you to try both of these on your own. So pause the video, try problem C, and then try problem D. You're just using the same process that we've done in these first two examples. So C is going to look a lot like A, because I do have an A, B, and C value. And problem D is going to look similar to B, as I do not have a B value. So go ahead and try those two, and then unpause and see what you got. Okay, so for problem C, I got my answers to be 4 and negative 14. So here's my work for that. You can pause and take a look if you need to. And then for problem D, I got my answers to be positive and negative 3. You can pause and look at those if you need to. All right, let's look at some more. So problem E. So this one, there's a little more work to do. We need to get the right side of our equation equal to 0. So very first thing, I will subtract 6 from both sides, and I will get 2a squared minus 7a minus 130 if I take negative 124 minus 6, and this equals 0. Okay, so now I can use the quadratic formula. So my a value, let's see, my a value is 2, my b value is negative 7, and my c value is negative 130. So if we start plugging this in, I have negative b, so negative 7 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 7 squared, minus 4 times my a value times my c value, all divided by 2 times a. Oops, I don't know why I wrote a, it should just be 2. Okay, so let's start simplifying. We have negative 7, so that will simplify to a positive 7, plus or minus, and then inside our square root we have 49 after we take negative 7 squared, minus, if you plug all that into your calculator, 4 times 2 times negative 130, you should get negative 1040, and this is all divided by 2 times 2, which is 4. Simplifying more, underneath the square root, 49 minus negative 1040 is like adding a positive, so this will actually simplify to 1089 divided by 4. And if you plug that into your calculator, you should get 33 divided by 4. So now at this point we can split into two different equations. So I have 7 plus 33 divided by 4 and 7 minus 33 divided by 4. So this one up here, I would get 40 divided by 4, which is 10. And this one, I end up getting, let's see, negative 26, I believe, divided by 4. Is that right? 33 minus 7, yeah. And this one, you would end up getting a decimal or a fraction. So you could write it as 6.5, or you could write it as negative 13 over 2. Either of those would be correct. But those are your two different answers for problem E. All right, let's go to problem F. Once again, we need to get 0 on the right side of the equation, so I will start by subtracting 5 from both sides, and I will get a squared minus 6a minus 16 equals 0. Looking at values, I can do a equals 1, b equals -6, and c equals -16. So using our quadratic formula, we would have negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Now we start simplifying. We get positive 6 since we have a double negative. Square root of 36 minus, we have 4 times 1 times -16. If you plug that into your calculator, I believe you will get -64. And this is over 2. Simplifying a little more, we have 36 minus -64, which is the same thing as plus +64. That will simplify to 100, which is a great number to have in the square root. So the square root of 100 would simplify to 10. And now I can split into my two separate pieces. So I need to take the positive and negative of 10, so 6 plus 10 divided by 2, and 6 minus 10 divided by 2. Simplifying the top one, we get 16 divided by 2, which is 8. And simplifying the bottom one, we get -4 divided by 2, which is -2. So 8 and -2 are the answers for problem F. Take a look at problem G. I want you to solve this one on your own. I'll give you a hint. You will start by subtracting 10, and since there are no like terms, you will end up with 4x squared minus 6x minus 10 equals 0. So from there, you can get your a, b, and c values, and then use the quadratic formula. Okay, so here's what I got after using the quadratic formula. I got 5/2 and -1 as my two different answers. All right, problem H. This one looks a little interesting. So I still need to get everything to the left side. So I will subtract 64 from both sides, and I will get n squared minus 64 equal to 0. So once again, I do not have a b value, but I do have an a and a c value. So our a equals 1, because there's no number or coefficient in front of n squared. Our b value is 0, and our c value is -64. Now, from here, we can use the quadratic formula and start plugging numbers in. So, x equals -b, which is 0, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 0 squared, minus 4 times a times c. This is all divided by 2 times a. All right, so this would simplify to 0 plus or minus the square root. Now 4 times -64, that would give us, let's see, -240, I believe, so we have minus a -256. This is all divided by 2. So we have minus -256. So that would be, so we have plus or minus the square root of positive 256. And this is still divided by 2. You can plug that into your calculator, but I believe the square root of 256 is 16. So at this point, we can split into two different equations or two different expressions. So I have positive 16 divided by 2, and I have negative 16 divided by 2. So our answers are going to be 8 and -8. Okay, we have 2 left. This one looks a little bit more complicated. So in order to first get this one so that way we can use the quadratic formula, I notice I have 2 terms with x squared. I want my x squared term to be positive when I combine these two. So what that means is I want to move the smaller value to the other side of the equation to make it positive. So -4 and -5, since they're negative numbers, -5 is actually less than -4. So I'm going to add 5x squared to both sides, and that will get me a 1x squared. And then I'm also going to add this 5 to the other side, and then this will get me -64. So at this point, you may have noticed this looks extremely familiar. I guess I'll just turn this into an x squared to kind of emphasize. So x squared minus 64 equals 0. That is exactly what we had in our last problem. We just had a different letter. We had n squared minus 64 equals 0. So the rest of this problem is actually going to be exactly like this one, but we just got some practice simplifying our original equation. So I'm actually not going to do the rest of this one. So see previous example. Because the rest of our work is going to look exactly the same as the previous problem. So all that is left now is example J. Last problem, I want you to do this one on your own. Make sure that as you move this -10b to the left side, you have your terms in descending order for your a, b, and c value. So your a value is connected to the b squared term. Your b value is connected to just the b term, but it's out of order, so you may want to shift them. And then your c value is connected to the standalone number. So go ahead and pause, work through this one, and then you can unpause to check your work.